Okay, I'm unmuted. Yay. Okay, I'm really glad this is an emotion safe space because I'm already crying. Y'all are so amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge honor to be here. My name is Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. I use she and they pronouns. And quick visual description, I'm a light-skinned, mixed race, South Asian, and white person with purple and brown curly hair. I blue dried my hair for you guys today, so the curl pattern's pretty good. I've got rose gold aviator glasses, purple lipstick, and I wanted to wear these earrings for people can see. This is an image of Sylvia Rivera, who created Stonewall and was a mad trans, often houseless Latinx woman who was very, very out about being neurodivergent as one of her many identities, and who her sister Marsha P. Johnson has this quote that says, "I may be crazy, but that doesn't make me wrong." And that's something I think about a lot in terms of the fact that these are two women who are Black and Latinx trans women who both were, seriously mentally interesting and neurodivergent, who founded all of modern queer and trans liberation, right? So those are some really mighty ancestors in our work that I'm really grateful for. Um, yeah, so just really thankful to be here. Okay, and I'm gonna I have a shitty printer, so I printed out the whole talk, but then they're like, "Oh, your black ink is low," and I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna read it off of the Google Doc." Um, so okay, I've done a million keynotes, but when I was getting ready for this one, I was like, I really don't want to fuck it up. So I did what people do, which is you Google how do good keynote, and this article came up that was like, this is the key to all great TED Talks. You just have to be clear about your one big idea. And I was like, this is so fucking corny, but okay, for what it's worth. I actually thought about, if there's one takeaway that I want people to take from me talking at you for 30 minutes, it's this. And I really mean it. So it's two things. So number one, I love other mad slash mentally ill slash crazy slash psychiatric survivor people the best. I really love us. I love us even when shit's really hard and when it's hard for us to figure out how to love each other. But I really like us so much better than all of the normals. And, when people, I forget who was saying it, but when somebody was like, oh, these are my people, I just, even being on this keynote for a couple minutes, I'm like, yeah, we are. And I'm just so grateful to everybody who's made this organization and for all of the work of your blessed and holy lives. So yeah, number one, I love us. And that's political and important because we're not supposed to love ourselves or each other. We're actually supposed to hate ourselves and kind of erase ourselves, right? And the second super casual thing is that I think that we are in a really critical moment, as you guys already know, where, first of all, because of Black led revolutionary struggle for forever, but specifically coming out of the, organizing and resistance of the past 2 years, we're at a massive moment where, defunding the police is being talked about in the New York Times, at least sometimes. It definitely was last summer. And where a lot of us who are abolitionists and mad folks are being told, okay, you want to defund the cops and put money into community-based healing? Great, show us how you want to do it. And it's also the apocalypse, like more so than usual. So there's kind of a feeling of like, okay, we got to actually make this happen. And I think we're simultaneously, the phrase the mainstream media uses is like huge global mental health crisis. And sure, but I think that we're in a massive collective grief crisis. Um, I guess some people aren't, but there's so much death and loss and change and hardness from the triple pandemic of coronavirus, white supremacy, police brutality, and, climate chaos that I don't know. I know there's some people out there who are really checked out, but most people I know are really in it. I just want to name, I lost 7 people who were close to me in the past 2 years, including my birth father, 2 of my closest comrades who are disabled queer people of color, and more folks. And I don't know, I have a really good friend who's an awesome white, mad, queer, certified medical tech who worked one of the ERs here in Seattle all through COVID. And we were talking and they were like, I have a really hard time dealing with anyone who didn't have a death COVID. You know what I mean? And I was like, did some people not have a death COVID? And they were like, yeah, some people had a I'm bored COVID. And I was like, I don't know those people. Um, so I think that because of this moment that we're in, we have so much wisdom and so much lived experience and so many lives we've led. And we are so poised to, in many different ways, answer that call of what are we going to do with all of the sadness and grief and crisis? You know, like, how do we take care of ourselves who are sad and grieving and in crisis? And also be the ones that people look to when they're like, you know about this crazy stuff, tell me what to do. So yeah, super casual. We basically have to make sure that nobody's locked up, and that everybody has what they need as mad people. Super, super no big deal. Uh, so yeah, I just want to say this is the time we're in. And I want to say that, you know, like probably all of us here, I've lived a lot of different lives. And when I think Jesse was like, oh yeah, you've got your fingers in all of these pots. And I was like, sure. And I was like, I want to name some of them and maybe encourage people to think about all of the different places that you come to this moment and this work from. So I honestly, it's so sweet hearing everybody's New York accent. I said that in the rehearsal, but it made me think about, yeah, how did I get into this work? I was a super crazy 18-year-old scholarship kid at NYU because, you know, NYU costs more money than God, but they give a couple of those full rides to poor and working class kids. And they're like, okay, good luck. And I had done some angel dust by accident at my high school graduation party, and I was having such intense visual hallucinations my whole freshman year, trying to hold down a 4.0 so I could keep my scholarship. Um, and when you talked about, you know, the East Village, I was like, that was some of the core of my activism is being a really crazy little 18-year-old femme that nobody took seriously, and everyone just was like, that person's weird, and who didn't have a lot of social capital or a lot of like, oh yeah, you're awesome, you're a revolutionary in the activist groups that I was in, who was really looked down on for being too much and for being a survivor and for being femme and for being brown. And everything that I bring into my work now at 46 comes from being that really little undervalued crazy kid who knew a lot of shit. So I was that person. I was that person who got threatened with conservatorship by her parents when I was like, hey, you abused me. Let's go to family therapy. No? Okay. I'm somebody who ran away to Canada and literally am alive because of what we called then the psychiatric survivor movement, from being in a room with people who had been locked up and people who were really, really, really wild in their brains and who had, in some cases, survived torture. And I really want to lift up two of the 7 people in my life who passed, some of whom you may know of, Dawn Weitz, Donweitz, and Graham Bach, Graemebacque. They're folks I know from 1997. They are 2 old white guys who were deep in the movement, and they both died within 2 weeks of each other this September. Graham actually DM'd me on Instagram to let me know that Don had passed. And, you know, sometimes people will be like, who's this white dude on your Facebook? And I was like, that's Graham, he's awesome. And I was like, that space that I ran into, which was just a small cast of imperfect, mad, disabled people in a room at Parkdale Community Legal Services, which is the free legal clinic. We were just a bunch of people who had been written off, who were like, we're going to make a movement out of our own lived experience and our brilliance, and we are going to fight forced treatment, and we are going to walk down to Queen Street Mental Health holding signs saying proud to be crazy. And more than all of the public activism, we're also going to create a space to eat snacks. We didn't have popcorn, but we had a lot of, you know, veggie plates from the Safeway. And it was the first place where I was like, it's really okay for me to be this weird where other people can see and no one's gonna try and lock me up or look the other way, or be scared of me. And they're actually gonna be like, hey, help organize this shit with us. And I would not be alive without that space. I've been there. I'm gonna speed it up because I don't have that much time. And then I'm like, ooh, I have all of this stuff I wanna share. But I did that. I was a frontline worker for 10 years at a little rebel organization called REC, which was the crisis line that all the other crisis lines sent people to who were too much for them. That was a multicultural, feminist, anti-oppressive, critical of psychiatry, therapy, and resource line, where we all had a private agreement not to mandate report. We would do anything but if possible, before we called the cops or children's aid, because we were mostly working with other Black and brown women, trans and two-spirit folks, often with kids. And we were like, we want to get you what you need. We don't want 911 to show up at your house and take your kids away and shoot you, right? And this is one of many bold, small experiments that were out there, where if you wanted, the therapists we worked with, we were like, if you want referrals from us, you got to be critical of the psychiatric complex, and you've got to have spots that are $0 to $5, because we want poor people to get really good therapy. That was in the 90s. And then somewhere in there, the writing started happening, and I started teaching queer, trans, and two-spirit kids of color writing, most of whom were survivors with PTSD. And somewhere in there, I became a movement worker around disability and transformative justice. And I want to say what those things are. Not because I don't think you know, but just because I think words are important. So by disability justice, when I say that, I mean a movement created 15 years ago in the backyard of a Haitian, Japanese, brilliant, disabled queer woman named Patty Byrne, with Leroy Moore and other friends and comrades, who were like, we're going to create a movement by and for people who are all kinds of disabled, all kinds of non-normative, that centers our Black, brown, queer, and trans revolutionary experiences, where we're going to kind of step into the cliffhangers that are left over from what had been a really white disability rights movement, right? And we're going to tell our stories. And we are going to talk about what our issues are, and that they are, for example, the thing that we keep coming back to, which is that 50% of Black, Indigenous, and POC people who are shot and killed by police are disabled, mad, neurodivergent, deaf, all of the above. And that we're not going to win against police brutality if we don't address racism and ableism at the same time. And by transformative justice, this is a nice segue, I mean the real chill project of how do we end abuse and violence without the police, prisons, or children's aid. And a lot of that's been storytelling for me too, when I came out about being a survivor of domestic violence by somebody else who was in the movement, who I could not call the cops on because it would not work out well for either of us. And at the intersections of those two places, I've done a whole lot of picking up the phone in the middle of the night, asking somebody, okay, you haven't slept for 3 days, you want to take a Benadryl, don't go to that ER, go to the other ER, they'll actually respect your pronouns, here's the handout. I worked at the Allied Media Conference, which is a big radical conference in Detroit, where one year we were like, wait, we don't actually have any alternatives to calling the cops if something happens, or even we actually were like, hey, we actually need to create support teams in case somebody is like, yo, I'm afraid my abusive ex is going to be here, or I just went to that workshop and I'm freaking out. So we had, burner phones and fanny packs and jars of rescue remedy and chocolate. And we were just like, yeah, go be a presence, like go be somebody that people can check in with when they're scared, go be somebody that someone can talk to when they're triggered or they're having an emotional hard time. And I want to say, and by the way, this is not me gassing myself up, I'm just like, here's all these different places that are all intersecting in my history of doing this work. Every single part of it, I, like you, have done from my own lived experiences of madness in myself and other people. I've done a lot with a little, and sometimes we've pulled off miracles with that lived experience. And sometimes we've also run into places where we don't know the answer, or we tried real hard and it didn't work. I've done a lot of suicide work, and there's people who I've supported who are still here, and there's people I've supported who aren't. And it's not because we failed, it's just because the shit's fucking hard. And there's not an automatic answer. So it's, okay, I got 15 minutes. I'm gonna make it snappy, but I guess I just want to talk about the importance of both lifting up that like everything that we've done, everything that everybody who's sitting here listening to this has done matters, even and especially when it's not perfect and shiny and guaranteed and with a 30-page academic letter behind it. And it matters even in the places where we're just like, I don't know the answer to that. That's a hard one. Or I tried and I failed. Or it worked for a while and then it stopped happening. Those cliffhangers are so important. I just, I think about, just to throw out a few, I think about the times I've talked with other friends who are first generation children of immigrants. Like I'm thinking about my friend who's also South Asian, who's like, yeah, I've read all that mad gift stuff and I love it. And with my dad, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like he's so angry at all of us. And I don't want to call the cops and I don't want to put him in the psych ward. And I also don't know if just sitting with him with the rescue remedy is going to be enough, And I'm like, yes, I do know because I've been there. Or, I think about friends of mine who were here in Seattle at CHOP at, the autonomous zone where we took over a big chunk of downtown for months and the cops actually just left and we had an autonomous zone for 4 or 5 months. And my friends who are doing street medicing there who were like, yeah, most of what we do, they're like, we deal with gunshot wounds and, tear gas and things like that at protests, but we're dealing with a lot of people in emotional crisis and mental health crisis. And we did a lot of amazing stuff. And we also dealt with some really wild shit that we were like, I need something else. And I also maybe need supervision. I need somebody to debrief to because I'm taking this home with me. It's like a fucked up game of Team Crazy Mad Libs, where you're just like, what do I plug in? And so I want to segue back to my, big idea about we've got this, small, huge task of remaking the world. And I want to say that all of these things that we're doing, whether it's big organized things or picking up the phone or sitting with somebody and being like, I'm going to listen to you and not judge you and not try and fix you and just be with you, right? Those are everything and they're real and they count and they are going to be and they already are. Like what you're doing at IDHA is already what is remaking the world. And I have a friend, Shira Hassan, who's an incredible Arab Jewish femme with deep roots in the Lower East Side. And she's done so much incredible transformative justice work mostly in Chicago for years. And I remember hearing her say once that she's like, there's so many ways that colonization exists, mostly around land, money, power, resources, and sovereignty. And she's like, there's also the ways in which culturally our minds have been colonized by living within white supremacist, settler colonialist, capitalist, ableist patriarchy, or as I like to call it, the WISCAP. It's not taking off, but I've tried. And she's like, a lot of the time when people come to her and they're like, what do you mean no cops? What do you mean no locked ward? Like, there's nothing else. She's like, there's a ways in which our imaginations have been locked down by the system that we all have to survive in. And we can't even start to let ourselves dream new options and try things out. We're in that place of extreme scarcity. And I just want to lift up a few examples that I see of our mad brilliance and innovation in this small project of replacing carceral systems. So I'm thinking right now I'm part of an emerging group that's actually coming out of that street medic crew that was working in Seattle last summer. Right now our acronym is GTFO for Get the Fuck Out. We might need to change it if we get grants, but we all just, in the Signal thread, we like it. And it came out of people being like, hey, we were trying to talk people down from really intense stuff as like anarchist street medics with backpacks. And it was great. And we are seeing that right now in Seattle, if someone's in crisis or if somebody witnesses somebody in crisis, there's actually no place to call but 911 right now. And we know that that is not an option, right? There's not even kind of like a crappy psychiatric crisis team that'll come out, like there's nothing, right? And people talked a lot about like how a lot of abolitionist thinking has been like, oh, you think, you hear someone screaming, don't be afraid, go and knock on the door. And people are like, totally. And also sometimes people were like, I've got my kids with me, or actually that neighbor is really racist and I don't feel comfortable going up there. Is there some other people I could call who aren't armed who could maybe go and be like, hey, I want to do a non-carceral check-in to be like, are you good? Do you have what you need? So we've got a crew of folks, some of whom are like abolitionist former EMTs who are like, fuck the macho bullshit. But like, we got a van and we're in the really early stage of, having a pilot project where we can be a peer-based, we also are, people living at the intersections of mental illness and disability. We want to be able to be a number you can call where you can go and be like, hey, what's up? What do you need? Do you need meds? Do you need food? Do you need somebody to listen to you for a while? What's going on? And this, has ties to my friend and comrade Ejeris Dixon, who's been active doing Black liberationist queer work in New York for years with Audre Lorde Project and with her project Vision Change Win, which you should really check out. A lot of her people are from New Orleans and Louisiana, and she was like, as Black folks in the South, we had our own ambulances for years because the ambulances wouldn't serve us. She was like, and 5 years ago, she was like, there's no people's ambulance now, but we could make one. And the thing that I'm seeing happening is like, we're making the people's ambulance. So real quick, I think about that. I think about Trans Lifeline and how they, over the past few years, have been like, yep, we're a suicide hotline and a crisis hotline, and we do not do active rescue. We, unlike every other suicide/crisis, line that I know of in North America, that's like, if you mention that you are suicidal and you've got a method and a plan, we're going to triangulate your location and send 911. They're like, we won't do that because we know that trans and non-binary people are not going to trust us if we call the cops on them without their consent. And actually, the cops are really dangerous to us as non-binary and trans and gender non-conforming people. So we're actually going to support trans life by listening to people and not doing it under the barrel of a gun. I think of all of the pure respites that are out there, including the one, you might have seen the article a while ago that's in Britain, where it's all women and they're just like, we don't have bed checks. We let you close your door. We listen to you about your trauma. We have acupuncture. If you want to self-harm, we actually, most people don't because they have privacy and they have someone to listen to them. But if you want to, we have equipment that's safe to do it with. We don't judge people. I think of my friend Carly Boyce, who's an incredible white Jewish, kinky, non-binary femme therapist who's been doing incredible suicide work in Toronto for a while now. And she's like, I went and I got an MSW so people could see me and charge their insurance. And she's like, I was talking at, the Federation of Ontario Registered Social Workers. And I was talking about, you got 5 minutes. I was talking about mandated reporting, and she was just like, I looked into it and I was like, it doesn't actually say that I've got to mandate report to the cops or the system. If someone comes to me and is suicidal, I can just be like, yo, I got to tell somebody, who are your people who we can talk to so you can get more support. So they were like, actually, there's ways around this if you're creative. These are just a few things. And I know that I'm not trying to be like, I don't know. I just know that there's a million more stories in the room with me. And I really encourage you to think back to all the times and places that you're doing organizing and creating projects and innovating and being there for your people to create this harm without the state. Okay, so real quick, because time flew. Jessie asked me she was like, can you specifically share some suggestions for people who are working in the system in terms of harm reduction? And I was like, yeah, I've got them. So organize and support patient organizing, okay? So in Toronto, Queen Street Mental Health, it's now known as the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. For 10 years, there was a group there called the Patient Council. And it was a group of patients, including people who were like long-term inpatient, who were like, no, we're organizing. They intervened at the Supreme Court level as a bunch of patients who were like, we need to speak up about what we want in terms of civil rights. It created a Bill of Client Rights. It really did a lot of work to put forward the idea of rights, not privileges. So you don't get, you are privileges, you have rights to say no to treatment, close your door, go outside. It helped implement the Least Restraint Initiative, which was an incredible harm reduction initiative, moving against forced restraint at Queen Street, which was huge. And I think that a lot of times, especially in the States, when I talk about this, people go, I've never heard of that. And I'm like, people who are in inpatient are always organizing. We're organizing when we create a distraction. We're organizing when we're like, nope, I don't want that food. We're organizing when we're on a non-contact ward and we hold someone's hand. And there's big, big, big mad people's histories of organizing inside institutions to fight for each other. So support that, look for that as a provider, know that's there, see how you can be an ally. Speak out against forced treatment, apply behavioral analysis, other harmful treatment. Like, take a public stand. Find other people who are like, I don't want to do forced treatment. I don't want to do ABA. Refuse to do it. Be like the people over at, oh God, I always blank out the name, the Judge Rotenberg Center, who there were some providers there, for people who don't know, it's a horrible youth psych institution in Massachusetts. that was doing really extreme ABA on autistic and MAD young people, there were some providers there who were like, I refuse to do this, and who testified. Support people when they sue. Work with patients' right lawyers, work to let people know about what their civil and human rights are, work against and take a public stand against conservatorship. And I got 2 minutes, so I'm going to be real quick. I'll try. So Jesse was also like, can you talk about cross-movement organizing? And I was like, yeah, it's fucking hard. And it's especially hard when it comes to mad people stuff, because so many, for a long time, this is changing. So many main, like, non-disabled / mad social justice movements were like, oh, disability, what's that? Madness, what's that? Which, you know, because of their own internalized ableism. And it's hard because it's hard to try and tell your story or be like, you should care about this, and have people just shut you out, right? And it's also hard because when we're telling these stories, often we're telling like the most personal stories from our own experiences of mental health, you know, ours, our families, our loved ones, and it's super vulnerable. Having said that, you know, I mean, we're still doing it, and it makes me think about 20 years ago, Eli Clare, you know, white trans disabled writer and activist. He was like, in his books Exile and Pride, he was like, yeah, God, what would it be like if the prison justice movement and disabled and mad people got together? And he's like, but then I go to these, you know, disability rights actions, and there's a guy holding a sign that says, you think prison's bad, try a nursing home. And he's like, no, they're both bad. And I'm like, fuck, it's 20 years later and we're still having to have the same argument. But, okay, ending on a positive note, a lot of the work that I've seen us do specifically as disabled, mad, neurodivergent, BIPOC people is, we are this bridge called my back. And it is fucking exhausting sometimes because the bridge gets walked on and we have to protect ourselves. But we also, through having conversations, we build stuff. And I think about the story, you know, I used to live in Oakland, and there was just years of conversations we were having with Black and brown social justice movements about disability, and people kind of being like, And then I remember my friend and comrade, Stacey Park Milburn, calling me 3 years ago from like, you know, a pro-DACA, pro-undocumented rally. And she was like, I'm crying because there are all these 18-year-old Black and brown undocumented like youth organizers who are like, hi, all the disabled and elder people are at the front. We've set up chairs. We're going to hold the sage up instead of burning it because some people have asthma. If the revolution's not accessible, it's not the revolution. And she was like, Leah, 10 years of conversations paid off. And I was like, okay, we can be in that big, long, slow march and get somewhere. And it's because of all of that fucking work and all of that conversation and all of that risk taking and all of that bearing our hurts to each other and those Instagram posts and everything. So I'm going to end there and say that I believe in the wild possibilities of our mentally interesting lives beyond the prison and medical industrial complex. I believe that everyone here is making that future together, and we're going to keep making it together, and that we all know so much about freedom because our existence as mad people is all about striving for the practice of freedom and living it, because we are some of the fucking freest people in the world. That's why they try and clamp down on us so hard. I believe in us. Let's keep going for the next 30 years and take care of each other along the way. And I love you. I only went 1 minute over. Thank you so much.